I, 26F, am a baker. My entire life, I have been told that my hands are good for one thing, and that is creating something beautiful from simple flour and sugar. My father told me that. My teachers told me that. Even my customers told me that. The only person who never seemed to agree was my mother, Helen. She was a woman who could find a flaw in a perfect diamond. To her, my passion was just a quaint little hobby, something to keep me busy until I found a proper job or a husband. She never saw the hours I spent perfecting a recipe. She never saw the flour dusting my eyelashes at 3 in the morning. She only saw the end result, something she could critique, something she could use to remind me that I was still, in her eyes, falling short. The biggest project of my career so far was my sister Chloe's wedding cake. Chloe was the golden child. She was a successful lawyer, married to a successful doctor named Mark. Her life was a neat, tidy checklist of accomplishments that my mother could proudly recite at dinner parties. I loved my sister, truly, but living in her shadow was a long, cold experience. When she asked me to make her wedding cake, I was honored and terrified. This was my chance to create something that even my mother couldn't criticize. It had to be perfect. I spent 3 months designing it. It was a 5-tier masterpiece. Each layer was a different flavor, telling a story of Chloe and Mark's relationship. The bottom was a rich chocolate for their first date at a dessert cafe. The next was lemon and lavender for the trip to France where he proposed. It was more than a cake. It was a monument to their love and a testament to my skill. I worked until my fingers were raw and my back ached constantly. I poured every ounce of my talent and my heart into that cake. The wedding reception was held in a grand ballroom. Hundreds of guests mingled, their laughter echoing up to the crystal chandeliers. When the time came for the cake cutting, the room fell silent. The photographer's flashbulb popped, capturing the moment Chloe and Mark joined hands to slice into the bottom tier. Everyone applauded. I felt a rare, warm surge of pride. I had done it. I had made something beautiful, something that brought joy to a room full of people. My mother stood beside me. She had been smiling for the guests, playing the part of the proud mother of the bride and the talented baker. She placed a delicate hand on my arm, her long red nails digging slightly into my skin. She leaned in close, her perfume filling my senses. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper, meant only for me. "It looks lovely, dear," she began, and for a foolish second my heart leaped. Maybe this time would be different. But then came the twist of the knife, the words that always followed any hint of praise. "But you'll never be as good." I felt the air leave my lungs. The room, which had seemed so bright and warm a moment ago, suddenly felt cold and distant. I could hear the cheers and the music, but they sounded like they were coming from underwater. The pride I had felt curdled into the familiar, bitter taste of shame. I looked at the cake, my beautiful creation, and all I could see were the flaws my mother would invent later. I managed a tight smile. I had to. 200 pairs of eyes were in this room, and I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "I'm glad you think it looks lovely, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She squeezed my arm again, a little harder this time. A silent warning. "Of course, dear. It's just a shame the buttercream is a little grainy. You've always had trouble with that." There was nothing wrong with the buttercream. It was as smooth as silk. I had spent 6 hours making it. But that was how she operated. She built a fictional failure and then presented it as fact, leaving me to question my own skills, my own reality. I pulled my arm away gently, the small act of defiance making my heart beat a little faster. I needed to get away from her. I needed to breathe. I murmured an excuse about needing to check on the catering staff and slipped away from her side. I walked toward the edge of the ballroom, trying to disappear into the shadows. The weight of her words pressed down on me. It wasn't just about the cake. It was about everything. My grades in school, my choice of friends, my apartment, my life. Nothing was ever quite right. Never quite up to her impossible standards. The phrase echoed in my head, a cruel mantra she had been chanting over me for 26 years. "You'll never be as good." As good as who? As Chloe? As her? As the imaginary perfect daughter she had in her mind? I never knew. The target was always moving. I stood near a large potted fern, trying to will the tears back. I watched my sister laugh as she fed a piece of cake to her new husband. She looked so happy, so carefree. She had no idea of the small, private cruelty that had just transpired. She lived in a different world, one where our mother's love was a warm, shining sun. For me, it was a heat lamp, one that threatened to scorch me if I got too close and left me cold if I stepped away. I decided to go to the ladies' room to splash some water on my face. I needed to reset, to put my professional face back on. I was not just a daughter tonight. I was a vendor. I had a reputation to maintain. As I turned to leave the ballroom, the large oak doors at the entrance swung open. A woman stood there, silhouetted for a moment against the light of the hallway. She paused at the threshold, her eyes scanning the room. She was tall and elegant, with dark hair cut in a sharp, stylish bob. She wore a simple, dark blue dress that spoke of quiet confidence. There was something familiar about her, in the way she held her head, in the set of her shoulders. I felt a strange sense of recognition, but I couldn't place her. Then I saw my mother's face. Helen was standing near the head table, talking to one of Mark's uncles. Her expression, which had been one of polite, feigned interest, froze. The socialite's smile vanished. Her face went pale, a stark white against her carefully applied makeup. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine fear in them. She looked like a cornered animal. My mother was not a woman who was easily scared. She was the one who did the scaring. To see her so completely rattled by the appearance of this stranger was jarring. My own troubles were forgotten for a moment, replaced by a deep, burning curiosity. Who was this woman? And what power did she hold over my mother? The woman began to walk into the room. She moved with a purpose, her gaze fixed on the family table. As she drew closer, the pieces started to click into place. The dark hair, the high cheekbones, the shape of her eyes. It was a face I had seen only in old, faded photographs from before I was born. Photographs my mother kept hidden in a box at the back of her closet. The woman was my Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister. I hadn't seen her in person since I was maybe 4 years old. The story I had been told was that Caroline was flighty, unreliable, and a little bit wild. My mother said they had a massive falling out over something trivial, and Caroline had simply drifted away, cutting off the entire family. Mom always spoke of her with a mix of pity and disdain, as if she were a lost cause. Poor Caroline, she would say with a sigh. She just could never get her life together. But the woman walking across the ballroom did not look like a lost cause. She looked composed, successful, and completely in control. She reached the family table where my father was now standing. He looked just as shocked as my mother. Caroline, my father managed to say, his voice a little shaky. "Hello, David," she said. Her voice was calm and smooth with a hint of amusement. She then turned her gaze to my mother, who had not moved a muscle. "Helen, you look exactly the same." The way she said it was not a compliment. It was an assessment, a clinical observation. My mother finally found her voice, though it was strained and high-pitched. "Caroline, what are you doing here?" she asked, her words sharp. "You were not invited." Aunt Caroline's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Oh, but I was," she replied, her voice carrying easily in the momentary lull of the music. "Chloe invited me. She reached out a few months ago. She said she wanted all of her family here on her big day." My mother's eyes darted toward Chloe, a look of pure fury on her face. Chloe, who had been talking to a friend, seemed to sense the tension and walked over. She looked nervous but resolute. "Mom, I invited her," Chloe said, her chin held high. "She's my aunt. I wanted to meet her." "We'll discuss this later," my mother hissed, her public smile now a terrifying rictus. She was trapped. She couldn't make a scene at her golden child's wedding. She was completely and utterly outmaneuvered. I watched this entire exchange from the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. The world had just tilted on its axis. My mother, the queen of our family, the puppet master who pulled all the strings, had just lost control. The fear I had seen in her eyes was real, and it was all because of the woman she had spent my entire life dismissing as a failure. In that moment, I realized that my mother's stories were not to be trusted. The narrative she had so carefully constructed about our family, about her past, and about her sister was likely a lie. A new feeling began to bloom in my chest, pushing aside the shame and the hurt. It was hope. Hope that I wasn't crazy. Hope that my mother's cruelty wasn't my fault. Hope that Aunt Caroline held the key to understanding why my mother was the way she was. I forgot all about the ladies' room. I had to talk to my aunt. I took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the fern. I made my way through the crowd, my eyes fixed on Aunt Caroline. She was now talking to Chloe, a genuine, warm smile on her face. My mother was pointedly ignoring her, locked in a tense, whispered conversation with my father. As I approached, Caroline looked up and our eyes met. She smiled at me, a real smile, and it felt like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The balance of power had shifted. The game had changed. And for the first time, I felt like I might have a chance to win. I waited for a moment when Chloe was pulled away by her new husband to greet more guests. Aunt Caroline was left standing alone for a brief instant, a small island of calm in the swirling sea of the reception. This was my chance. I smoothed down my dress, took a steadying breath, and walked toward her. My steps felt lighter than they had all evening. The weight of my mother's words was still there, but it was no longer crushing me. It was now just a dull ache, overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. "Aunt Caroline?" I said, my voice a little softer than I intended. She turned to me fully, her smile widening. It was a kind face with fine lines around her eyes that suggested she laughed often. She looked nothing like the unstable, tragic figure my mother had painted. She looked strong. "You must be Maya," she said. "I would recognize you anywhere. You have your grandmother's eyes." I was taken aback. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had passed away when I was very young. I had only vague memories of her. "I do?" I asked. "Oh, absolutely," Caroline confirmed, her gaze warm and direct. "Your mother hates that. Grandma Eleanor was never one to suffer fools gladly, and she saw right through Helen." The casual way she said it, as if it were a commonly known fact, sent a small shockwave through me. My mother had always spoken of her own mother in glowing, reverent tones, describing a sainted woman who adored her. Here was a direct contradiction, offered freely and without malice. It was just a statement of fact. This was the first crack. The first tiny fissure in the fortress of lies my mother had built around our family. I felt a dizzying sense of validation. It wasn't just me. Someone else saw it too. She never mentioned that," I stammered, feeling a little overwhelmed. Caroline's smile became a little sad. "I'm sure she didn't," she said softly. "Helen is very particular about the stories she tells." She then gestured toward the magnificent cake, still the centerpiece of the room. "Don't tell me you're the one responsible for this work of art." "I am," I said, a blush rising to my cheeks. "I'm a baker." "A baker?" she said, her eyebrows raising in genuine surprise and delight. "Well, that is just perfect. It's spectacular, Maya. Truly, the detail on the sugar flowers is exquisite." The praise felt so foreign, so unconditional. There was no "but" attached to it. No subtle dig hidden within the compliment. It was just pure, honest appreciation for my work. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. My mom said it was too sweet. Aunt Caroline let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was a laugh of recognition, of someone who had heard it all before. "Of course she did," she said. shaking her head slightly. If something you do is good, she has to find a flaw. If it's perfect, she has to pretend it's hers. And if she can't do either, she has to belittle the effort it took. Some things never, ever change. Hearing my entire life's experience with my mother summed up so perfectly by a woman I had just met was breathtaking. It was like she had reached into my mind and pulled out the secret, tangled thoughts I could never articulate. "How do you know that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I was the first one she practiced on," Caroline said, her expression turning serious. "Before you, before Chloe, there was me. I was her original project." We stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the party fading into the background. It felt like we were the only two people in the room. I had so many questions, a lifetime of them, bubbling up inside me. Why did she leave? What really happened between them? Why was Mom so afraid of her? But I couldn't ask them here. Not now. My mother was watching us from across the room. Her eyes narrowed into slits. I could feel her disapproval like a physical force. "I'm so glad you came," I said instead. "Chloe really wanted you here." "I'm glad too," she replied. "I wanted to see my nieces, and I wanted to see if anything had changed." She glanced over at my mother, her gaze unblinking. "It seems some things have and some things haven't." She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek silver business card holder. She slipped out a card and handed it to me. "This is me," she said. "Call me sometime. We should talk properly." I looked down at the card. Caroline Weathers, founder and CEO, the Gilded Spoon Cafes. There was an address in a city 3 states away. Founder and CEO. My mother had told me she couldn't hold down a job. Another lie, and not a small one. This was a massive, deliberate deception. "Wow," I said, looking from the card back to her face. "Mom always said—" I trailed off, not wanting to be rude. "I know what she said," Caroline finished for me, her voice gentle. "Let's just say my sister and the truth have a very flexible relationship." Before I could respond, my father appeared at my elbow. His face was strained, and he was trying to force a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maya, honey, some of your mother's friends are asking about the cake. You should go talk to them." It was a clear dismissal. He was running interference for my mother, trying to separate me from Caroline. "Of course, Dad," I said, tucking the business card safely into my pocket. I gave Caroline a small, grateful smile. "It was so good to finally meet you properly, Aunt Caroline." "You too, Maya," she said. "Don't be a stranger." I walked away, my father's hand on my back guiding me toward a group of my mother's friends. I could feel Caroline's eyes on me, and I felt a strange sense of strength, of being seen. My father, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves. "Dad," I said in a low voice once we were out of earshot, "why did you never tell me Aunt Caroline was coming?" He sighed, the sound heavy with years of practiced avoidance. "Your mother. It's complicated, Maya. You know that. Chloe went behind her back to invite her. It stirred up a lot of old feelings." "It's more than old feelings, Dad," I pressed, feeling a new boldness. Mom looked scared, genuinely scared. Why is she so afraid of her own sister? My father's face closed off. He reverted to his usual role as the peacekeeper, the enabler. "They just have a lot of history," he said vaguely. "Old wounds. It's best not to pick at them. Just try to be nice. For Chloe's sake, it's her wedding day." He was shutting me down, using my sister's happiness as a shield. It was a tactic he had used my whole life to avoid confronting my mother's behavior. But it didn't work on me anymore. Something had shifted. I wasn't going to just be nice and pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I spent the next hour talking to guests, accepting compliments about the cake and smiling until my face ached. But my mind was elsewhere. I was replaying every conversation, every expression. My mother's fear, my father's evasiveness, Caroline's calm confidence. The pieces of the puzzle of my family were being rearranged, and the picture that was emerging was dark and unsettling. Later, when the dancing was in full swing, I found Chloe near the bar, taking a break. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked radiant. "Hey," I said, giving her a hug. "You look so happy." "I am," she said, beaming. "Everything is perfect." Then her expression grew a little more serious. "Well, almost perfect. Mom is livid about Aunt Caroline." "I noticed," I said dryly. "Chloe, why did you invite her? And why didn't you tell me?" She took a sip of her champagne. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I knew Mom would try to stop me, and I was worried she'd put you in the middle of it. I found Caroline on a business networking site a while back. I was curious. All my life, Mom has told us this story about her being this sad, lost person. But her profile? It didn't match the story. She's really successful, Maya. She owns a whole chain of cafes." "I know," I said, touching the card in my pocket. She gave me her card. "I just wanted to know her," Chloe continued, her voice earnest. "She's our family." It didn't seem right that Mom just cut her out of our lives forever. So I sent her a message and we started talking. She's amazing. She's funny and smart and normal. It made me wonder what Mom's side of the story was leaving out. "A lot, I think," I said. Chloe nodded. "Mom cornered me earlier. She said Caroline was a manipulative liar and that I was naive to fall for her act. She said I did it to deliberately humiliate her." "She said the same thing to me," I confessed. "That we did it to embarrass her." We looked at each other, a shared understanding passing between us. For years, my mother had used a strategy of divide and conquer, telling one of us a slightly different story than the other, keeping us off balance. But now we were comparing notes, and the stories weren't lining up. "It's not about her," Chloe said, her voice firm. "It's my wedding. I can invite my own aunt if I want to, and I'm glad I did." "Me too," I said, feeling a powerful sense of solidarity with my sister. "It's more than okay. It's interesting." The rest of the wedding passed in a blur. I watched my mother from a distance. She had recovered her composure and was back to playing the gracious hostess, but there was a brittleness to her smile now. She never went near Caroline again. It was as if a line had been drawn down the middle of the ballroom, and each sister stayed firmly on her own side. When it was time to leave, I saw Aunt Caroline saying her goodbyes to Chloe and Mark. She gave them both a warm hug. Then she looked across the room and caught my eye again. She gave me a small wave and a nod, a silent promise. "Don't be a stranger." I knew I wouldn't be. The wedding was over, but for me, something was just beginning. I had a phone number in my pocket and a lifetime of questions that needed answers. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to my mother's moods and manipulations. I was about to take action. I was going to find out the truth. The days following the wedding were tense. The happy glow of the celebration evaporated quickly, replaced by a thick, suffocating atmosphere in my parents' house, where I was temporarily staying while my apartment was being painted. My mother was giving everyone the silent treatment, a classic move from her playbook. She would glide through the rooms like a ghost, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. She communicated only through martyred sighs and the pointed clatter of dishes being put away too forcefully. Her anger was primarily directed at Chloe, who had committed the ultimate sin of defying her. But since Chloe was now on her honeymoon, I became the convenient, nearby target for her displaced fury. The criticisms, which were usually veiled in passive-aggressive comments, became blunt and relentless. One morning, I was in the kitchen, sketching out an idea for a new pastry. My mother walked in, poured herself a cup of coffee, and stood behind me looking over my shoulder. "Still doodling?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You know, that cake at the wedding was a disaster. I've been getting calls all week." I froze, my pencil hovering over the paper. "What are you talking about?" I asked, turning to face her. "Everyone I spoke to said they loved it." "Oh, please, Maya," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "People were just being polite. It's a wedding. They have to say nice things. My friend Eleanor told me her piece was dry as a bone, and the frosting, as I said, was grainy. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed the whole family. My blood ran cold. This was a new level of cruelty. She wasn't just attacking my skills anymore. She was trying to rewrite history, to gaslight me into believing my greatest success was actually a humiliating failure. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking slightly. The cake was fresh. I baked it the day before. Well, it didn't taste fresh, she snapped. And your aunt showing up? The cherry on top of a truly mortifying evening. I can't believe you and Chloe would conspire to do that to me. After everything I've done for you. The familiar guilt began to prick at me. The feeling that maybe I was the ungrateful, difficult one. But then I remembered the look on her face when Caroline had walked in. The fear. This anger wasn't about a dry cake or a surprise guest. It was about control. She had lost it, and she was desperate to get it back by tearing me down. I stood up, my sketchbook forgotten on the table. Chloe wanted her family at her wedding, I said, my voice steadier now. Aunt Caroline is her family, and I had nothing to do with the invitation. You were happy to see her, though, weren't you? She accused, her eyes narrowing, chatting away with her like you were old friends, letting her fill your head with who knows what lies. I thought of the business card in my wallet. Founder and CEO. I thought of Caroline's calm, steady gaze. Maybe they're not lies, I said quietly. My mother's face contorted with rage. Get out of my kitchen, she whispered, her voice dangerously low. I didn't argue. I picked up my sketchbook and walked out, my heart hammering against my ribs. I went up to my old bedroom and shut the door, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. The confrontation had left me trembling, but underneath the fear, there was a hard knot of anger. She had called my work a disaster. She had accused me of conspiring against her. She had crossed a line. I pulled out my phone and my wallet. I looked at Caroline's card, at the elegant font and the impressive title. My mother had built her entire world on a narrative where she was the victim and Caroline was the villain. But what if it was the other way around? My resolve hardened. I was done being her emotional punching bag. I was done questioning my own sanity. I needed to know the truth, and there was only one person who could give it to me. I took a deep breath and dialed the number on the card. It rang 3 times, and then a crisp, professional voice answered. Caroline Weathers. Hi, Aunt Caroline, I said, my voice a little breathless. It's Maya, your niece. I heard the smile in her voice when she replied. Maya, I was hoping you'd call. Is everything all right? You sound a little shaken. The genuine concern in her voice almost made me cry. I'm fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's just, my mother. Things have been difficult since the wedding. Let me guess, Caroline said, her tone wry. She's claiming the cake was a flop and that my showing up was a personal attack designed to ruin her life. I let out a shaky laugh. You're scarily accurate, I admitted. How did you know? Because that's her script, Maya. It hasn't changed in 30 years. When she feels threatened or exposed, she lashes out and rewrites the story to make herself the martyr. The details change, but the theme is always the same. Poor Helen, surrounded by ungrateful people who don't appreciate her. It was like she was reading a page from my own secret diary. She said my cake was a disaster, I confessed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. And let me guess, you're starting to believe her, aren't you? Caroline asked gently. A little, I admitted in a small voice. Don't, she said, her voice firm but kind. That cake was a masterpiece. I've been in the food industry for 20 years, Maya. I know talent when I see it. You have it. Your mother's opinion has nothing to do with your baking and everything to do with her own issues. We talked for over an hour. It was the most honest, validating conversation I had ever had in my life. I didn't have to censor myself or choose my words carefully. I just talked, and she listened. She asked me about my bakery, about my dreams, about what it had been like growing up with Helen as my mother. Then I finally got the courage to ask, Aunt Caroline, why did you leave? Mom always said you just disappeared. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was heavier. I didn't disappear, Maya. I was pushed out. By your mother. And then she told me everything. She told me about their childhood, how Helen, as the older sister, had always been intensely jealous of her. Caroline was more artistic, more free-spirited, while Helen was obsessed with appearances and social climbing. Our mother, your grandmother Eleanor, she saw it, Caroline explained. She tried to manage Helen's jealousy, but it was like trying to contain a forest fire. Anything I had, Helen wanted. Anything I did well, she had to do better. Or else sabotage it. The story that unfolded was worse than I could have imagined. When they were in their early 20s, Caroline had a dream. She wanted to open a small artisan bakery and cafe. She spent a year developing a detailed business plan, creating recipes and scouting locations. She poured her heart and soul into it. I made the mistake of showing it to Helen, Caroline said, her voice tight with old pain. I was excited. I wanted to share my dream with my sister. She was so enthusiastic, so supportive. She told me it was a brilliant idea. A week later, she announced that she was opening her own bakery. She used my business plan, Maya, my recipes. She stole my dream right out from under me. I was speechless, a cold horror seeping into my bones. What happened? I finally managed to ask. It failed, Caroline said simply, miserably, because Helen has no passion for baking. She has no patience. She just wanted the glory of being a successful business owner. She ran it into the ground in less than a year, alienating customers and racking up debt. And when it all fell apart, she blamed me. She told everyone I had given her a bad idea, and that my shoddy business plan was the reason she failed. It was a perfect echo of what she had just done to me with the wedding cake. Create a success, watch it be admired, and then have my mother tear it down and blame me for its imaginary flaws. But that wasn't the worst of it. The final, irreparable break came a few years later. Their grandmother Eleanor had become ill. Caroline had moved in to take care of her. Grandma had some money saved up, Caroline said, her voice now a low, pained whisper. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to help me start over after Helen had destroyed my bakery dream. One day, the money went missing from Grandma's desk. It was a few $1,000s in cash. Helen came to visit that afternoon. She found the empty envelope in my purse. She told our grandmother that I had stolen it, that I was a thief and a drug addict trying to feed my habit. No, I breathed, horrified. Yes, she said. She created this whole elaborate story. She was so convincing, so full of righteous fury. Our grandmother was old and sick and confused. She believed her. She disowned me. Helen called the police. I wasn't arrested because there was no proof, but the damage was done. My own grandmother thought I had stolen from her. Your mother stood there and watched my world fall apart, with a look of triumph on her face. That was when I knew I had to leave. I couldn't survive in the same city as her. So I packed a bag and I left. I never spoke to my grandmother again. She passed away a year later, still believing I had betrayed her. Tears were streaming down my face as I listened. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was monstrous. My mother hadn't just been critical or difficult. She was a saboteur. She had destroyed her own sister's life out of pure, venomous jealousy. I am so sorry, Aunt Caroline, I sobbed. It's not your fault, honey, she said gently. None of this is your fault. I'm telling you this so you understand who you're dealing with. She's not just a critical mother. She's a deeply damaged person who cannot stand to see anyone around her, especially her own family, succeed. Her criticism of your baking isn't about you. It's about her own failure. She's trying to crush your dream just like she tried to crush mine. Everything suddenly clicked into place. Every backhanded compliment, every dismissive comment, every impossible standard. It was all a projection. She wasn't trying to make me better. She was trying to make me smaller. Small enough that I would never outshine her, never succeed where she had so spectacularly failed. The sadness I felt began to burn away, replaced by a cold, hard anger. My whole life, I had contorted myself into knots trying to win her approval, believing that if I could just be good enough, she would finally love me without reservation. But it was never about me being good enough. It was about her feeling powerful. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice thick. "First," Caroline said, "you stop believing her. You know your worth, Maya. Don't let her take that away from you. And second, you gather your own power. She relies on secrets and lies. The truth is not her friend." After we hung up, I sat on my bed for a long time. The phone still clutched in my hand. The world looked different. The walls of my childhood bedroom felt like a prison. My mother's actions were no longer just hurtful. They were sinister. I thought about the wedding cake, the symbol of my hard work and passion. She hadn't just criticized it. She had tried to poison it, to turn my triumph into a source of shame. I knew I couldn't stay here. I couldn't live under her roof, under her thumb, for one more day. But I also knew that just leaving wasn't enough. If I just walked away, she would spin the story. I would be the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family. She would remain the victim, the long-suffering mother. No, that wasn't going to happen. As Aunt Caroline said, the truth was not her friend. And for the first time, I felt like I had a powerful ally on my side. An idea began to form in my mind, a plan that was both terrifying and exhilarating. My parents' 30th anniversary was in 2 months. My mother was already planning a huge, extravagant party to celebrate their perfect marriage and her perfect life. It was going to be her ultimate showcase. And it was going to be the perfect stage for the truth to finally come out. The days after my phone call with Aunt Caroline were a strange mix of clarity and dread. Living in the same house as my mother now felt like sharing a cage with a predator. I saw the manipulation in her every word, the calculation behind every sigh. When she would offer a rare compliment like, "That blouse looks nice on you," I could now hear the unspoken second half. For something so cheap. I understood that her entire world was built on maintaining an illusion of superiority, and my role was to be the flawed backdrop that made her shine brighter. My anger didn't fade. It settled into a cool, quiet resolve. I was no longer just hurt. I was strategic. I knew I needed more than just Caroline's story. My mother was an expert at twisting words and playing the victim. If it was just Caroline's word against hers, my mother would paint her as a bitter, jealous liar, and many in our family, conditioned by years of her narrative, would believe her. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Caroline had mentioned evidence. "She relies on secrets and lies," she had said. "The truth is not her friend." I decided to call her back. Not just for support, but for ammunition. "Maya, it's good to hear your voice," she said, answering on the second ring. "Hi, Aunt Caroline," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me, about everything." "It's a lot to process," she said with sympathy. "It is," I agreed. "But it also makes everything make sense. There's something I need to ask you, though. When you told me about everything that happened, with the bakery and with Grandma, you said my mother is afraid of the truth. Do you still have anything? Any proof of what she did?" There was a pause. "That's a very direct question," Caroline said, a note of approval in her voice. "I like it. You're not just going to roll over." "I can't," I said simply. "Not anymore. She's planning this huge anniversary party for her and Dad. She's going to stand up in front of everyone and talk about her wonderful life. I can't just sit there and listen to the lies anymore, but I need something concrete." "I understand," Caroline said. "Yes, Maya, I have things. After Grandma Eleanor died, her lawyer sent me a small box of my personal effects that had been left at her house. Helen didn't know about it. Inside were a few things I thought I'd lost forever. My heart started to beat faster. What things? I have the letters, she said. Letters our grandmother wrote to a friend after the money was stolen. In them, she talks about how confused she is, how Helen was so certain it was me, but how it didn't seem like something I would do. In one of them, she even writes, Helen seems almost pleased by this whole awful business. It's not a confession, but it shows Grandma's doubts. It shows Helen's character. That's something, I breathed. Is there more? Yes, the most important thing. I still have my original business plan for the bakery. The one I wrote. It's dated, with my handwriting all over it. And I have a little something else. A friend of mine who knew about the whole situation felt so bad for me that she kept something for me. A newspaper clipping. A newspaper clipping? I asked, confused. When your mother's bakery, Helen's Heavenly Bites, went under, the local paper did a small piece on local businesses that had closed. It's not a flattering article, Maya. It talks about poor management, customer complaints, and financial troubles. It directly contradicts the story she's told for years, that it was a charming little venture she closed to focus on her family. This was it. This was the undeniable proof I needed. Letters from her own mother questioning her motives. A dated business plan that would prove she was a thief. A public record of her failure. Aunt Caroline, would you be willing to send me copies? I asked, my voice trembling with the audacity of my own request. Just so I have them. Just so I know I'm not crazy. I used her own words back to her. I'll do better than that, she said, her voice firm. I'll make copies and I'll keep the originals safe. But yes, I will send them to you. You deserve to have the truth in your hands. Knowledge is power, Maya. Don't ever forget that. A week later, a thick manila envelope with no return address arrived at my apartment, which was finally ready for me to move back into. I had timed it perfectly, leaving my parents' house with a polite, generic excuse about wanting my own space back. My mother had been cold and dismissive, but my father had seemed almost relieved, pressing some cash into my hand and telling me to take care. He knew a storm was coming. He just didn't know what it would look like. I took the envelope inside and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I tore it open. Inside, just as Caroline had promised, were the photocopies. I read the letters from my grandmother first. The spidery, old-fashioned handwriting spoke of confusion and sorrow. She wrote about how Helen had been so insistent about Caroline's guilt, refusing to consider any other possibility. The line Caroline had mentioned leaped out at me. Helen seems almost pleased by this whole awful business. It's a look in her eye I haven't seen since she was a girl and broke Caroline's favorite doll. It was a chilling insight into my mother's character, a glimpse of the malice she had harbored since childhood. Next, I looked at the business plan. It was filled with youthful optimism. The name on the cover was The Gilded Spoon, Caroline's dream. The recipes, the marketing ideas, the financial projections, it was all there. Then I looked at the newspaper clipping. The headline was small. Local bites the dust. Helen's Heavenly Bites closes after 6 months. The article was short but brutal. It quoted an anonymous former employee who mentioned the owner's lack of experience and difficult temperament. It spoke of suppliers who were not paid and a reputation for inconsistent quality. This was the truth. A story of theft, failure, and blame. A story my mother had spent 30 years burying under a mountain of lies. And I was holding it all in my hands. The first person I showed it to was Chloe. She had just gotten back from her honeymoon, tanned and happy. I invited her to my apartment for coffee, and after we had chatted about her trip, I laid the papers out on my coffee table. I need you to see something, I said, my voice serious. She read through everything in silence, her brow furrowed. Her happy post-honeymoon glow faded, replaced by a look of dawning horror. When she finished the newspaper clipping, she looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Oh my God, Maya," she whispered. "I knew Mom was difficult, I knew she could be manipulative, but this is evil. She told me I'd never be as good, I said, the words I had been holding on to for weeks finally spilling out. At your wedding, right after you and Mark cut the cake. My cake. She leaned over and whispered it in my ear. Chloe's face crumpled. She what? She asked, her voice cracking. She said that to you? On my wedding day? Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Maya. I had no idea. It's not your fault, I said quickly. It's what she does. She's been doing it to me my whole life. But this, I gestured to the papers. This is why. She can't stand to see me succeed at the one thing she failed at so spectacularly. Chloe stood up and started pacing my small living room. All those years, she said, thinking out loud. All those times she'd helpfully suggest you find a real career. All those backhanded compliments. It was all because of this. Because she stole her own sister's dream and then failed. Yes, I said. And she framed her for stealing from their dying mother to cover her tracks. Chloe stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression hardening. That's it, she said, her voice low and furious. I am done. I am done making excuses for her. I am done pretending her behavior is normal. What are you going to do, Maya? What's your plan? She's planning that big anniversary party, I said, my own plan feeling more real and more terrifying as I said it out loud. She's going to stand up in front of 100 people and talk about her perfect life. I'm not going to let her. What are you going to do? Chloe asked again, her eyes shining with a fierce, protective light. Because whatever it is, I'm with you. 100%. Looking at my sister, my former rival for our mother's affection, and seeing her as a true, unconditional ally was the final piece of strength I needed. The golden child had seen the rot beneath the gilded surface. I was no longer alone. I'm going to invite a guest to the party, I said, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. And I'm going to bring copies of these papers. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm just going to be ready. And when she starts telling her stories, I'm going to be ready to tell the truth. Good, Chloe said, nodding firmly. It's about time someone did. My plan was simple, yet it felt like the most complex military operation of my life. The anniversary party was my mother's personal Super Bowl. She had been planning it for months, micromanaging every detail from the color of the napkins to the playlist for the string quartet. It was designed to be the ultimate performance of the perfect life she had curated, a testament to her success as a wife, mother, and pillar of her social circle. And that was exactly why it was the perfect venue for my confrontation. She would be at her most confident, her most arrogant, and therefore her most vulnerable. I had two secret weapons. The first was the folder of photocopies, now tucked away in a safe place. The second was Aunt Caroline. I called her and explained my idea. You want me to come to Helen's anniversary party? She asked, a hint of laughter in her voice. That's like inviting a fox to a henhouse convention. Are you sure, Maya? I'm sure, I said. I need you there. Not to fight, but just to be there. Your presence alone is enough to rattle her. And when things happen, I don't want to be alone. I'll be there, she said without hesitation. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Just tell me when and where. Chloe was my inside woman. She reported back on my mother's preparations. The stress was making her even more tyrannical than usual. She was snapping at my father, changing the menu daily, and complaining constantly that no one appreciated the monumental effort she was making on their behalf. She called me several times, not to talk, but to issue orders. Maya, I need you to make a dessert display for the party, she commanded one afternoon over the phone. Nothing too complicated, just some of your little hobby cakes. It'll add a personal touch. It was a classic move, co-opting my talent to enhance her own event while simultaneously belittling it. The old me would have been hurt. The new me saw it as an opportunity. Of course, Mom, I said, my voice sweet as sugar. I'd be happy to. I'll make sure it's my best work. The night of the party arrived. It was held at an expensive country club. The room was filled with soft lighting, lavish floral arrangements, and about 100 of my parents' friends and family members. My mother was in her element, gliding through the room in a shimmering silver dress, accepting compliments and air kisses. She looked like the queen of a small, prosperous nation. My dessert display was set up on a long table, and I had to admit it was stunning. I had created a dozen different miniature cakes and pastries, each one a perfect jewel-like creation. As guests arrived, they flocked to the table, murmuring in appreciation. My mother stood nearby, accepting the praise as if she had baked them herself. "My daughter, Maya," she would say, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "She's quite the little baker, a fun hobby for her." I just smiled and nodded, biding my time. Chloe found me, squeezing my hand. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Aunt Caroline arrived about an hour into the party. She made a quiet entrance, but my mother saw her instantly. I watched as the blood drained from my mother's face, her perfect hostess smile faltering for a split second. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Her composure had a crack in it. Caroline didn't approach her. She simply got a drink, found Chloe and me, and began to chat with us as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Her presence was a quiet, powerful statement. She was not afraid. She would not be hidden. The main event of the evening was the speeches. My father went first, giving a short, sweet, and slightly nervous speech about his 30 years with my mother. Then it was my mother's turn. She took the microphone, her silver dress sparkling under the lights. She looked out at the crowd, her face a mask of serene, maternal pride. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. 30 years. It's hard to believe. David and I have built such a wonderful life together. A life filled with love, and of course, our two beautiful daughters. She smiled at Chloe, then her eyes flickered over to me. Chloe, our brilliant lawyer, who makes us so proud every day. And our Maya, with her creative spirit. She gestured to the dessert table. Her wonderful little hobby has brought so much sweetness to our lives. There it was again. The public praise laced with private condescension. The pat on the head. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. She continued, talking about the importance of family, of honesty, of supporting each other's dreams. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely breathe. She was painting a masterpiece of delusion, and everyone in the room was buying it. After her speech, as the applause died down, I knew I couldn't let it stand. I didn't want to make a huge, dramatic scene. I wanted to be precise, surgical. I walked over to where my mother was accepting congratulations from a circle of her friends. My father, Chloe, and Caroline, sensing the shift, followed a few steps behind me. "Mom," I said, my voice calm and clear. "That was a beautiful speech." She beamed at me, basking in the glow of her friend's admiration. "Thank you, dear. I'm so glad you enjoyed it." "I especially loved the part about supporting each other's dreams," I continued, my voice still even. "It reminded me of your dream, your first bakery." The smile on my mother's face froze. Her friends looked at me, then at her, their expressions curious. My what?" she stammered. "Your bakery," I repeated gently. "Helen's Heavenly Bites." "You never talk about it. I think it's such an inspiring story of a young woman following her passion." My mother's eyes were wide with panic. She was trapped. She couldn't deny it in front of these people, many of whom were old enough to remember it. "Oh, that," she said with a forced, airy laugh. "That was just a silly little thing I did before I had children. A whim." "It was more than a whim, wasn't it?" I pressed, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "It was based on a very detailed business plan." My father stepped forward, putting a hand on my arm. "Maya, now is not the time," he whispered urgently. I ignored him. I looked directly at my mother. "I just think it's a shame you don't take more credit for it," I said. "Although, I suppose the credit really belongs to the person who wrote the plan, doesn't it?" Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Aunt Caroline step forward, moving into the light. My mother's eyes darted from me to her sister, and in that moment, her composure shattered completely. The mask fell away, revealing the raw terror beneath. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that was loud enough for everyone in the immediate circle to hear. "How dare you bring her here and do this to me? At my party?" "Do what, Helen?" Caroline asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Allow your niece to ask about your business history?" "You're trying to ruin my life." My mother spat, her voice rising. "You've always been jealous of me." The argument was escalating, drawing more attention. Guests were turning to stare. This was the moment of truth. "Jealous of what, Mom?" I asked, my voice cutting through her tirade. "Jealous of your failed bakery? Or jealous of the way you lied about it for 30 years? Then came the final, decisive blow. It came not from me, but from Caroline. She looked my mother dead in the eye. "I'm not the one who stole from our dying grandmother, Helen," she said, her voice low but carrying with absolute authority. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. My mother looked as though she had been physically struck. Her face was a mess of rage and humiliation. And then I delivered the final checkmate. "You know, Mom," I said, my voice filled with a strange, sad calm. "You once told me I'd never be good enough. But watching you now, I realize I never wanted to be good at what you do. I never wanted to be good at lying." Then I turned to Caroline, making sure everyone could hear me. "Aunt Caroline, I've been thinking about the offer you made me." Caroline smiled, playing her part perfectly. "Oh, the one to come and be the head pastry chef for my cafe chain?" "Yes," I said loudly and clearly. "I'd like to accept. I think it's time I pursued my little hobby professionally. I'm moving next month." The room fell into a stunned silence. My mother stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. In the space of 5 minutes, her entire world had been dismantled. Her carefully crafted image was shattered. Her sister was not the failure she had claimed. Her daughter was not the mediocre hobbyist she needed her to be. And her darkest secrets were being hinted at in front of her closest friends. She had lost control of me, of Caroline, of the narrative. She had lost everything that mattered to her. "You can't," she whispered, the words empty of their usual power. It wasn't a plea of love. It was the desperate cry of a tyrant losing her subject. I looked at her, at this woman who had made me feel so small for so long. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the bright, clean flame of my own freedom. "I can," I said, "and I will. I guess I am good enough after all." I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to show her the papers in my purse. The simple, quiet truth was a more devastating weapon than any loud accusation. I turned my back on her, on the ruins of her perfect party, and walked away with Chloe and Caroline by my side. I didn't look back. The fallout from the party was immediate and catastrophic, at least for my mother. Her grand performance had ended in a spectacular train wreck. According to Chloe, who had stayed behind to make sure our father was okay, my mother had a complete meltdown after we left. She alternated between screaming that Caroline and I had conspired to ruin her and trying to convince her bewildered guests that we were both mentally unstable liars. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Her friends had seen the terror in her eyes. They had heard the conviction in Caroline's voice. They had witnessed my calm, deliberate departure. The carefully constructed facade of Helen, the perfect matriarch, had been irrevocably cracked. Her party, meant to be her crowning achievement, ended with guests leaving early, whispering amongst themselves. The next morning, my father called me. His voice was weary, drained of all energy. "Maya," he said, "your mother is devastated." I took a deep breath, preparing myself. For years, this line would have been my cue to feel guilty, to apologize, to smooth things over. Not anymore. "Is she devastated that she was caught, Dad?" I asked, my voice even. Or is she devastated that she was cruel to me my entire life and systematically destroyed her own sisters? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It didn't have to happen like that, he finally said, his voice pleading. You could have been gentler. You humiliated her. I have been gentle my whole life, Dad, I replied, a cold anger rising in me. I have swallowed her insults, I have accepted her backhanded compliments, and I have walked on eggshells around her moods. I did that to keep the peace, to make your life easier. But gentle doesn't work with a bully. You should know that better than anyone. You've been enabling her for 30 years. That's not fair, he said, his voice weak. No, it's not, I agreed. It's not fair that you stood by and watched her treat me that way. It's not fair that you let her cut her own sister out of our lives based on a lie. I'm done with gentle, Dad. I'm done with keeping the peace. From now on, I'm just going to live my life. And you and Mom can either be a part of it, honestly, or not at all. I hung up before he could reply. It was the hardest conversation I'd ever had with him, but it was necessary. I was drawing a line in the sand, not just for my mother, but for him too. The days of silent complicity were over. A few hours later, Chloe called. She sounded energized. I am so proud of you, she said, her voice ringing with sincerity. I just got off the phone with Dad. He tried to give me the "your poor mother" speech, and I shut it down. I told him he had two choices: get Mom into serious therapy or get used to a much smaller family. Wow, Chloe, I said, impressed. You really went for it. I learned from the best, she said, and I could hear her smiling. Seriously, Maya, don't you dare feel guilty for a single second. She deserved that. She deserved all of it. For what she did to you, for what she did to Aunt Caroline, she's lucky we were as gentle as we were. Her support was like a balm on the raw, new wounds of the confrontation. Thanks, Chloe, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. It feels weird, scary, but good. Like I can finally breathe. That's because you can, she said. The air is finally clear. My last call was to Aunt Caroline. She was already at the airport, heading home. So, she said, her voice warm and amused. That was quite the party. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. You could say that. Thank you for being there, Caroline. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have, she corrected me gently, but I'm glad I could be there to watch. You were incredible, Maya. You were calm, you were strong, and you spoke the truth. That's a power your mother has never understood. Are you ready for this? She asked, her tone shifting to business. It's a big move, a new city, a big new job. I thought about my small bakery, which I would have to sell. I thought about leaving my friends, my apartment. And then I thought about my mother, about the suffocating weight of her judgment. The choice was easy. I have never been more ready for anything in my life, I said, and I meant it. The next month was a whirlwind of packing, planning, and goodbyes. I sold my bakery business to a young, enthusiastic baker who I knew would take good care of it. I packed up my life into boxes. My mother, true to form, refused to speak to me. She sent me a single, curt text message. I hope you're happy with what you've done. You've torn this family apart. I didn't reply. I knew the truth. I hadn't torn the family apart. I had just exposed the cracks that were already there. I moved 3 states away and started my new life. Working with Caroline was a revelation. She was a brilliant boss, a creative partner, and a wonderful mentor. She gave me complete freedom in the kitchens. My creativity, which had been stifled for so long under the cold shadow of my mother's criticism, flourished. I designed new pastry lines, developed seasonal menus, and helped train other bakers. I was respected. I was valued. I was successful. My relationship with Chloe grew stronger than ever. We talked on the phone every week, our conversations open and honest. She told me that things at home were strained. My mother was refusing to get help and was doubling down on her victim narrative, trying to paint me as the villain who had abandoned her. But Chloe said. It wasn't working as well as it used to. People had seen her mask slip. Family members were asking questions. My father was, for the first time, starting to push back against her reality warping, albeit timidly. The foundation of her power was crumbling because it had been built on lies, and the lies had been exposed. A few months into my new life, I was in the main kitchen of our flagship cafe, working on a new wedding cake design. It was even more ambitious than Chloe's, with delicate, hand-pulled sugar ribbons cascading down the sides. It was joyful work, free from the pressure and fear that had haunted me before. As I worked, my mind drifted back to that night at the wedding reception, to my mother's cruel whisper, "You'll never be as good." For so long, I had believed her. I had let her words define the limits of my own potential. But she was wrong. I was good. I was more than good. I was thriving in a life I had built for myself, far away from her poison. I thought about my mother, isolated in her big house, clinging to her bitterness while her world slowly shrank around her. She had tried to make me small to make herself feel big. But in the end, her cruelty had only served to isolate her. She had lost a daughter, alienated her sister, and damaged her relationship with everyone else. She had told me I'd never be as good. The funny thing was, she was right in a way. I would never be as good as her at manipulation. I would never be as good at cruelty. I would never be as good at sacrificing my own family for the sake of my ego. And I had never been more grateful for that fact. The truth wasn't that I would never be as good as her. The truth was, she was never brave enough to be as good as me. She had a dream once, a bakery, a passion. But when it got hard, she quit. She failed. And then she spent the next 30 years making sure I would never succeed. I placed the final sugar flour on the cake. It was perfect, and it was all mine. I smiled. She had finally learned what it feels like to be small. And I had finally learned what it feels like to be free.